Hello, you're listening to the Diablo podcast, and today we are joined by Chris Wilson, creator of Path of Exile, which, before you start complaining or change, has a lot to offer, and I think the Diablo community, and he's here today to talk to us about Path of Exile and also kind of contrast it to Diablo 3.
Cool, thanks very much for having me.
Well, again, thank you for coming on, and we sincerely appreciate it. So one of the things I thought we would kind of start out with is the transition from Diablo 3 to Path of Exile. In particular, just jumping into the game, what somebody could necessarily expect. So, the first experience anybody has with Diablo or with Path of Exile is leveling, going from 1 to 70, or in the case of Path of Exile, from 1 to 100. So what is the approach in Path of Exile for leveling? How does it happen?
So our approach is more reminiscent of Diablo 2, I guess, where there's pretty harsh diminishing returns that occurs by leveling, and people aren't entirely judged by what level their character is. For example, the power of a level 100 character isn't substantially more than the power of a level 90 character. It's more of a logarithmic scale to judge how much time someone has spent playing. You can achieve your build at much lower levels. So, for example, if you see someone who's level 80, you know they've got to high level. If they're level 90, you know they've sunk a lot more time in. 95, exponentially more time. 97, even more, and practically so, and so on and so on. A level 100 character has certainly spent quite a large investment relative to most players. I understand, with tricks you can get to 100 much faster than you could a few years ago. So it's reminiscent of the leveling speeds of, 1.09 Diablo 2 maybe.
So starting out in Diablo 3, 1 to 70 essentially is tutorial. You don't have a lot, I will not find a single item that I will ever use after, I hit level 70. And then I have to go and the Paragon system kicks in. Recently, you guys introduced a new expansion, which was free, amazingly, and changed the leveling system kind of again, moving it from a 4-act system to a 10-act. What was kind of the impetus for doing so?
Our game had the action RPG trope that even initial Diablo 3 had, where you play through the same storyline several times. In our case, you had 4 and then 3 playthroughs. We dropped a 4th playthrough many years ago. And so this worked well to extend the amount of time in the, I guess you could call it the tutorial before you get to the end game, that you'd spend leveling up your character to establish your build. But the problem we found is there was a retention issue at the end of the first and second playthrough, where you'd finish the game and then you have to play through the same thing again, and sure, it's harder and more challenging. The problem was that many players kind of felt, well, I've played this, I could go play something else with my time now, and there was a bit of a drop-off there. And so our goal, especially as we were also launching into China and on the Xbox One recently, was to push for a lot of new users with Path of Exile 3.00. And in order to achieve this, we wanted to get rid of this repeated difficulty level system. And so we expanded the contents of that patch from just the new Act 5 to include Acts 5 through 10. It's a bit of a push to get that all done in time, but we managed it, and it only delayed us by about 4 months more than we expected.
It's an amazing achievement, because I was following the development, and to see it go from just 1 act to 5 new acts, 6 technically, is insane. How do you throw something like that together? How do you convince your team, what, we're gonna do more than just double it?
So I remember the conversation vividly. It honestly feels like not that long ago, like it was in the room that I'm in at the moment, and that we were basically discussing what would it look like. So players were upset at there being 3 difficulty levels. They didn't like having to play through exactly the same content 3 times. And so they asked us to reduce it to 2 difficulty levels. Now, with the addition of the 5th act, adding a second, making it 2 difficulty levels would be 10 acts in total, which is about the right amount of playtime, but it would still involve repetition. And we felt that just dropping a difficulty level doesn't really solve the problem. It just, reduces the problem slightly, and people would still say they don't like playing the second difficulty because it's the same as the first.
Right.
So we asked the question, well, what if the second one was just really different? We mixed up all the monsters and we changed the colors and stuff. And people said, oh, I guess that helps. It makes it feel fresher. But it's still kind of repeating the same quests. So we said, well, what if the quests were different because you were sent back to the beginning again and had to do all of that stuff, but with different quests? And people said, well, that's crazy. How are we going to make 5 acts worth of quests? But upon looking into it, we realized it's pretty possible. Quests aren't actually that bad. And so this kind of scope crept up repetitively where we said, well, if we're doing this, why don't we give a fresh coat of paint to all the areas, like replace half of them with entirely new content? And that got the level team busy. And then the monster team said, you know what, we can make a ton of new monsters as well. And then the boss team said, well, if we're doing this, why don't we have unique act bosses and unique sub-bosses throughout all these areas? And it eventually became 5 new acts that are firmly based on the original 5. Like, without a doubt, there's content reuse. It's just that the amount of content reuse is substantially less than what it would have been if we hadn't let the team get carried away with it. Which works for the benefit of the players, of course.
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit on something that's really kind of interesting, the approach to difficulty. In Diablo 3, at the moment, you have your 1 to 70, which is normal, and then you have this sliding scale where you go from normal to, honestly, I can't even remember them because there's a bunch before you get to Torment, and then there are 13 levels of Torment. And you just said 3 difficulties was a little bit of an issue. I mean, as a developer, how do you gauge the amount of difficulty to allow your players to choose from?
So we were using the system a bit like Diablo 1 and 2. We play through the game iteratively, on one difficulty level, then on the next, and on the next. You couldn't jump between them. Like, you couldn't say, you know what, I'm ready to ratchet it up to hard and then have it be more difficult.
Right.
Which is kind of a fundamental difference from the way they're doing it in D3 at the moment. And so our system here, which is I assume why they scrapped it in Diablo 3, had the problem that you have players repeating content and it gets boring after a while. The system they have at the moment in Diablo 3, I believe, where you can change the difficulty on the fly. The issue we have here, the reason why we never investigated anything like that in Path of Exile, is because we believe that gamers all believe that they're going to be the best player. And so they're all told by the internet, you need to be playing this on the hardest difficulty.
Right.
And so if they can't, they're going to criticize the game potentially. Now, I haven't actually played Diablo 3 since the point that they made that difficulty change. I've only played it pre-Reaper of Souls, so I haven't experienced it. I don't exactly know how it's done in D3. But our understanding of the system and the reason why we're not doing something similar in Path of Exile is because we'd rather have one consistent experience. Some people are just a lot better at it than others and more quickly settle down into the difficult content that's appropriate for them at the end of the game.
I like that. I mean, it's an interesting approach, and it's a nice contrast to those who might feel a little overwhelmed by that bevy of options. And I think you're absolutely right that ultimately you're always just going to chase what is the most rewarding or what is the best. The goal is to get to the end game, and then to do so, anything in between is just kind of it's fluff. So I can definitely appreciate that by comparison. Since we're talking a little bit about Diablo, and you did mention the launch in China, and you mentioned the Xbox One release, I understand, to the best of my knowledge, David Brevik was involved with you guys. So how cool was that, as a longtime Diablo fan, to work with the man who made one of your favorite games?
Well, that's the coolest thing. David is amazing to work with and to talk to, and getting to meet him initially a few years ago prior to us discussing Path of Exile with him was really cool. Like, the guy is amazing. If you guys ever get a chance to meet him, he is full of great stories about the development of the games he's worked on, and he's just a genuinely nice guy. And so it was awesome getting to both meet him and then later work with him. And so the backstory here is that David's got experience bringing games to Eastern markets, and when we're collaborating with Tencent, they both wanted to, get a bit of a marketing push and also to get advice from, an experienced industry professional who both knows this genre inside and out and knows about Chinese launches.
Right.
And so collaborating with David was a natural evolution of that, and he was kind enough to donate his time to help us out. and has given us some really good feedback. And the awesome thing about his feedback is he won't just tell us why what we're doing is right. He'll tell us how to do it better, and maybe we can't do that, but it is really good to hear the ideas that he has, because we see what an alternate version of Path of Exile could be like, which has a completely different take on certain systems.
Now, how much of your time did you spend just asking questions about Diablo 2?
Most of the early time. And that was both for entertainment, but also because it helps explain interesting decisions behind stuff. And like with Path of Exile, a lot of the Diablo 2 development appears to be that's how it evolved. There's some intentional decision making in there about the important stuff, but it's amazing how many systems worked out that way because it was fun, and that's really good to hear because we do a lot of that ourselves.
Yeah, from just a brief interaction with David, I honestly felt like I could talk to him all night, and he would just engage in it, and it was really impressive. So many years after Diablo 2 had been out, that he was so approachable, and so willing to just talk on end about it, that I almost felt greedy. I felt greedy that I'm taking this man's time. Much akin to the way that I feel with you, Chris. Like, you are a busy man and you're doing great things, and I'm taking your time, and I'm very appreciative.
That's okay. It's time that's spent hopefully giving information to a lot of other people.
No,
and that's partly why I feel okay talking to David, because I can take his advice and ideas and then disseminate them out through Path of Exile to a much larger audience, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little tangential, but I think it relates. You're a very important person with Path of Exile, and here you are talking to us. I mean, what is your approach to engaging with a community? We've seen Blizzard. They're much more walled off. I've tried for years to try and get them to do an interview or to come and to talk with us, to no avail. My most success was getting the former game director to do a nice long interview, but the only time I seem to be in any way successful is with former employees. But it seems like you are much more engaged with your own community.
I came from the community of action RPG players, so I understand that the community is everything. I mean, if we didn't have our community, we wouldn't have any income, because, as you know, with free games, you need people to be actively playing. You can't just sell a bunch of boxes and then not care if anyone plays them.
Right.
So we absolutely need our community to be active, because if we let it go even for a bit, there goes the ability to pay our staff and rent and everything, and then the lights go out. So we want to avoid that, and that's why it's really important that we both, chat with our community so they know what we're thinking, but also help, give indications of what we're working on and the reasons why. And this is always a challenge, because for marketing reasons, you kind of want to hold some secrets, right? It's fun to watch the trailer that says 6 new acts. Right. And that means we can't say to the players, hey guys, don't worry, we're fixing this. Honestly, we've actually got 6 acts coming. That'll solve it for sure. It'd be reassuring to say that to them. But of course, it's tricky when you want to hold it back for marketing reasons, so you get a big bang and everyone on the internet says, whoa, look at how many acts it is. You should play this game.
Yeah, I can get that a little bit. But I mean, I've noticed, like, you guys just did a Reddit AMA today. You have a very vibrant Path of Exile Reddit community, and you could just be reserved and just hang on to your own forums, but it seems like you're more than willing to engage in really just all sorts of communication.
Yeah, we try very hard to engage wherever we can, and we're looking for new places to chat to people. I mean, there's people who will only talk via YouTube comments, right? We haven't worked out a way to fully address those guys, but there's a lot of communities out there, especially now that we're reaching into other countries where we don't speak the language particularly well,
right.
And other platforms where, some of the Xbox users are on our subreddit, but certainly not all of them, and it's sometimes hard to keep those guys abreast of our development updates.
I get that. So, kind of coming back to the contrast of Diablo 3 and Path of Exile, I had talked about classes. Diablo 3 at the moment kind of sticks to the main archetypes. We have the barbarian, the wizard, yada, yada, yada. And you guys have chosen to stick to that, but then you have a lot of branching off points, with ascendancies, and now the Pantheon system, I think, it's available to all, so it's not truly a class-based system, but it is another level of differentiation. So how does that work? I mean, how do you make those calls to have everyone have a starting point, but then you have so many other branching off points within the class itself?
Initially, we liked the idea of a completely classless system where you could. I mean, I'm going back a second. So back in Diablo 2, people would do crazy builds. Like they'd have the melee sorceress or the sorceress that only casts fireballs and that kind of stuff. You know, you'd see it on Diablo2.net.
Right.
These awesome builds where people would play through to Hell Diablo doing something crazy. So we wanted that. We wanted a lot of opportunity to do weird things. And so we figured a classless system would work really well, where we actually called them templates rather than classes on the very first day of development, where you start off by picking a template, but it could be anything. Eventually these turned into classes because our internal, people we talked to didn't like the concept of picking a character template. It sounded weird. So we labeled them as classes, but they were still really all the same class. And then after we added the passive tree, we gave a little bit of a nudge towards certain classes being better at certain areas of the tree. It actually worked initially that you got strength, dexterity, and intelligence by investing in strength, dexterity, and intelligence passives, and you can invest in off-class stuff, but you got less bonus, so you'd have to have a good reason for going and doing something weird on the tree.
Yeah.
Over time, the starting location got pulled out, so each class has its own starting location, and that previous bonus was removed. So you start off near the things that benefit you, but if you want to go on a trip across the tree, you can do. The problem we found, though, was that because of this classless system, you kind of only needed to play one or two characters. You'd play, the one that you liked and maybe a second one, but it wouldn't be this cool thing that they had in Diablo, where you intend to play each of the classes. Like when I was playing Diablo 3, I made a wizard because I wanted to play a wizard. I made a monk because I also wanted to try a monk. I made a barbarian because I wanted to try that, and I played it quite a lot, due to wanting to tick off every character class. And we weren't getting that in Path of Exile. People had no need to tick off a ranger because they just played a witch with a bow and a marauder with a bow. And so that's why when we were adding the Ascendancy classes in the Ascendancy expansion, we locked them to the specific starting classes. We said, you know what, there are 3 ways you can play a witch, or 3 broad, archetypes here. You have to be a witch to try these. You can still play a summoner duelist if you want, and there are some interesting builds there, but there are also a variety of very strong ones as a witch. And this has helped give us class identity back again. And I firmly believe that class identity is actually a really good thing, and that games that try to go classless are, pursuing the wrong goal.
Yeah. Interesting. So the ascendancies themselves, like you mentioned, you have 3 different ones to kind of branch off into. And that was how long ago did that happen?
That came out in March last year, so about 18 months ago.
So that's still relatively new, and it just feels very natural within the game where you do become excited. And you switched off the method in the newest patch to allow for this to happen just a little bit sooner, or actually to make sure that it happens a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So the method for unlocking ascendancies, for those who don't know?
In order to unlock an ascendancy, you have to complete the labyrinth, which is a kind of a trial where you enter and get one chance to play through. It's like a mini hardcore event. If you die, then you have to start at the beginning again. And upon completing the labyrinth, which is full of traps and maze-like stuff and a difficult boss in multiple phases, then you get the ability to ascend to a specific subclass. And of course, there are many different difficulties of labyrinth as you progress through the game, so you can unlock more points for your subclass.
And it is, from my perspective, absolutely intense, but it definitely feels well earned when you do get to start moving your class in one of those directions.
It's a good reward system for a difficult piece of content, and we've got players out there who love the labyrinth and feel it's the best thing in the game because they like that evocative, flavor-rich, kind of full of traps and puzzles thing. And there are players out there who petition me saying we need to remove the labyrinth immediately and it does not belong, and dodging traps is not what this game is about. And so that's why we have it off as a side thing you can do where it's available. It has a good prize behind it. And if you really don't want to do it, well, find a friend to help you with it.
And to point out, when you say traps, like, these are legitimate traps that are happening here. It's not just a couple monsters that are sprung upon you. These are moving your mouse and dodging things, because if you stand too long, you will die.
Yeah, it's pretty unforgiving. And there are some puzzles there that are difficult. Like when I'm testing stuff and then I have to stop and get some paper out to do a puzzle, it's an interesting experience.
Yeah, I've had a few of those moments. You know, I have a little one at home, and I play late at night. She was crying. It's like I'm in the middle of a lab. If I teleport out, it cancels. So I'm gonna find a safe corner, and I'm gonna hope for the best when I come back. Um, it's a dangerous
That really
mindset.
is hardcore mode there.
It reminds me of playing in a thunderstorm during Diablo 2 hardcore. Just as risky,
Nice.
but you just sometimes you just got to do it.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember vividly playing against Diablo in my Diablo 2 hardcore character while I was on a really laggy dial-up connection. And you get these like 5-second lag spikes from New Zealand to America. I don't know if my character's alive. I'm not sure what's going on, but we'll see if I survive it.
yeah,
Yeah.
those were always fun times. But since we're on the topic of hardcore death in some ways, you guys have done something that's been really interesting. And when you guys first came out, it was actually a big petition within Diablo 3, which was when you die in hardcore, you don't lose everything. Your character actually survives in the standard league. Um, so where does that come from? Is that due to those New Zealand rainstorms and leg, or um,
So I played a lot of hardcore Diablo 2. I mean, I got to 99 on an Amazon relatively early in one of the latter seasons, played just a ton of that mode, so I kind of understood the mentality behind it. And there were two things that were important. The first one is I could not persuade my friends to play hardcore. They weren't interested. I mean, some were, but most weren't interested. And the second thing was that if the character became a non-hardcore character, that's as good as dead to me. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to log into it again. It's just not hardcore, so it's not part of my scope I'm looking at. So we realized that if we make it so hardcore characters just become non-hardcore when they die, this achieves both things. It means there's no disadvantage to starting in hardcore, because worst case scenario is you just become a regular character. I can say to my friend, why don't you play with me? And then if you die, you just go back to regular, and then you keep playing like you otherwise would have. And secondly, if I die and I lose my character, it's dead to me. It's of no use. Like, logging in kind of like it's just a snapshot of what it was like. Even though I could technically play it in standard, that wasn't interesting to me. Now, over time, this became slightly more complicated because when we introduced challenge leagues, dying in a hardcore challenge league takes you out of the challenge leagues entirely.
right?
So it's not quite the same as being moved just across to standard and being able to continue because you're now out of the challenge leagues. But otherwise, the principle's pretty much the same.
Now, as we add in layers of modes, you guys also introduced a solo self-found mode. And
Yep.
what was the kind of the genesis of that?
So players who don't trade enjoy the game more. They play more time, they have more character upgrades, they write with nicer sentiment on the forums when you do sentiment analysis. In general, they have to spend longer to get the items they find. They value them more. They have more item upgrades. They see less of the game, but still quite a lot of it. There's more that they can aspire to because they haven't got some cheese build that kills a shaper in the first week. And in general, if you have players who don't trade, they have a great time. Having said that, we are in no way wanting to turn trading off. It's an amazing part of the game. It's just that we found some players choose not to trade because they enjoy it more. And then there was no way for them to get recognition for this because they're playing on hard mode without the easy access to trading items. And they're playing on hard mode without anyone really acknowledging it. And so they started to do it manually where they put SSF in their name and tell people, don't trade with me, I'm SSF. But that's not a guarantee. That's just kind of, a badge. So by adding the actual support for the mode, we're able to make it that those people get recognition for playing in SSF mode. And we did it in a clever way where if you decide you want to start trading, you take yourself out of SSF mode and drop into the regular game. So there's no disadvantage to starting that way. In fact, everyone is SSF until level 2, from a theoretical point of view,
Right.
because you can't trade while you're in the first area before you get to town. So then it's just a question of how long you want to go before you start trading. Maybe you get to Act 2 or Act 5 before the point where you do your first trade. And so SSF mode essentially scores how far you got. And it doesn't matter if you don't care about the score, but some people really do. Like, I've got to about the 80s before I started trading, and I'd like to push that further. I'd like to hit 90 without trading in the future. But in each case, I generally do convert the character to a trading one.
Yeah, I actually in at the start of the Harbinger League, I was the exact same way. I went SSF until I think it was 55, and then I died. But it was an interesting rush. I think you brought up an interesting point, and that is that some people, and you said a lot of good sentiment comes from the people who aren't trading, but you don't want to get rid of trading. And that was kind of a central issue within Diablo 3 for a long time. There was the auction house. And then that went away, and you got rid of one form of trading, which was the auction house, and they also got rid of player-to-player trading. You can still trade. It has to be a shared drop within the game. So each item gets about 6 hours to do that. So it can only be traded with players who are in the instance. But essentially, if you wanted to trade an item between somebody in your clan or something like that, you can't do that anymore. And I think that's an interesting perspective that you brought up in terms of like, while some people might really, really enjoy not trading and really doing it on their own, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right. The interesting thing about Solo Self-Found and Path of Exile is that you can take an item you found and trade it by taking that item out of Solo Self-Found. So if you're playing and you find a Mirror of Kalandra, it's not worthless to you. You don't regret the fact, oh no, I found it in Solo Self-Found League, I can't do anything with it. You make a level 1 character, slap the mirror on, convert it across to regular, and you're rich. And so that's a thing where you can always become a trader. It's just that you get scored for how long you weren't one. And trading is a very difficult topic in Path of Exile because unanimously all the vocal players want it to be easier. The fact we're not making trading easier is a major. They don't understand it. They have no idea why we have that policy. And this is difficult because we don't want to hurt the players, but at the same time, we don't want the effects that you get when you can trivially upgrade your character to max within a few days of it starting. I mean, like, when I played using the auction house, both in Diablo 3 and in other games, I was playing the auction house a lot more than I was actually killing monsters. 99% of my upgrades came from there, and it was a completely different game, and one that I enjoyed less than actually killing monsters. The nice thing about no trade in Diablo 3, of course, is that you actually get the experience of finding items to upgrade your character, and that's a really good feeling and kind of the core behind action RPGs. And that's why we want a hybrid approach where trading is cumbersome. You can't do it trivially. There's a cost to it in terms of time and frustration. And we want to take some of that frustration away, but at the same time, it's never going to become particularly fast.
That's really interesting. I appreciate that perspective, Chris, because like it is it's very easy to sit on the other side of the computer and to come to a conclusion about what is right, and then to see what goes on behind it. You are right. I mean, in an auction house, it does become it becomes a game in and of itself, as opposed to actually going out and killing some monsters. Interesting. So, coming back to the contrast, in Diablo 3, for skills, we can earn them over the 1 to 70. They slowly unlock by level. And then you can kind of just mix and match as you want. Path of Exile takes a very different approach to skills, and that is through the use of skill gems. Still have some that require some levels, but it seems to be much more open. How did you guys really come to this?
Well, we tried a whole bunch of different skill systems when we were experimenting, and we ended up with the skill gem system because we liked the idea of you modifying how skills behave and combining them together. The example of I have my fireball and then I put multiple projectiles on it, so it splits out into several, like the multiple projectiles mod in Diablo 2 that the monsters would have.
Right.
And then I can choose like chain, so when it hits a monster it will bounce to another target, maybe fork, so they split it up. If I want to slow the projectiles down so that they cover a wider area, then slap slow projectiles on there, and you can use these support gems to change the shape of the skills you're using. It's a lot like the runes in Diablo 3, where you can modify, how the skill behaves one time.
Right.
Though our idea was in 2006, a long time before they announced that game. The issue that we found, though, is that it's actually quite difficult to have it so that there are really interesting support gems that affect every skill in the game in an interesting way. So we have a lot of them that do like damage conversion and various other, reducing the chance to crit but increasing something else, and don't have a visual component. And so while there are a lot of support gems to use, more than 100 in fact, and the backbone of the game is using them, we are trying to find ways to have more interesting visual ones that are just smart and clever. Like, we have one called Blasphemy, which turns a curse into an aura so that it affects monsters automatically within a small radius around you. That kind of stuff is very cool. The ability to turn skills into totems that cast skills, or turn a skill into a mine or a trap, those are very cool, and we want to add more like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my first real characters was a Flame Blast Totem Templar, and just being able to kind of take like, okay, this is a spell, and I'm going to attach it to a totem, and just kind of get out of the way and watch it do its work was an interesting perspective as opposed to kind of the traditional of this is the skill, I'm just going to level it, which is, I mean, it's still an option in Path of Exile, but you do have a lot of those kind of interesting options for skills to actually kind of do something outside of the norm.
Yeah, we care a lot about the active skill system and really want to keep pushing its boundaries. It's an area where I feel that we have established a good baseline, but we haven't successfully pushed it as hard as we need to in the last year or two. Like, it's something that I would certainly love to see improved in subsequent expansions.
And, I mean, there are a lot of skills currently in the game, both support and actual, attack. And as you add them in, I mean, how hard is it to kind of keep track, or to not integrate something that becomes immediately a must use or a must forget?
It's tricky, and the player response to us adding skills is fascinating, where, if we add something which is slightly under the average power level, or even under the power level of the accepted good ones, if you see what I mean,
right,
then it's garbage. Why did we add it? And if we add something that's more powerful than the average power level of the ones that people are using, then everyone switches to using that,
right,
which of course is a problem. And so it's very tricky to hit exactly the point where it's competitive with the other things that are the best in the game, but not too much more, which is tricky, especially because what we want is, like, I don't know if you've played Magic the Gathering, the card game, but
I loved it when I was a kid, but I have not played it in years, unfortunately.
There's this cool thing with that game where they print some cards which have no apparent use, or they're just bad or whatever, and then years later they'll print some new card which by itself isn't interesting, but it combos with an older card to do something really cool. And this happens like every few months in that game, where an old card that was previously worthless suddenly gets an identity and a life because it's a combo piece with something new. And so we've done that with Path of Exile as much as possible, where we make a unique item, we make a skill, which is maybe slightly below average, but then later on, it becomes powerful when comboed with a new thing that's also by itself slightly below average. The problem is the introduction of either of these is met with a lot of relatively hateful comments about why we're wasting our time, when the point is we're trying to lay seeds which later grow into really awesome combinations.
Have you, obviously you're doing this internally, and you know what's going to work. Have you ever been surprised at how long it took for somebody to figure out? Or have there ever been combinations that people have figured out that you didn't know would interact?
Both of these occur. The players figuring out happens all the time. Like, every good build there is pretty much a combination we hadn't predicted, because we try to reduce the power level of the ones we know are going in to the point where they're reasonable. So something that the players count as good is above the reasonable level and totally awesome. And so each one of those implicitly we didn't plan. Like, we don't want to add something which is game dominating, but it's awesome when the players find it. An example of this that was really interesting, that I think sums up the kind of crazy stuff we have to deal with in Path of Exile is, okay, so this is a bit complicated. There's a skill called Mirror Arrow. What it does is it fires an arrow and creates a copy of you at the destination. That's a copy which will distract enemies and fire some shots. And in PvP, it's kind of hard to tell which is which, because
Right.
there's also a skill called Blink Arrow, which copies you and teleports you rather than making a copy at the other end, so you don't know whether the person used Mirror Arrow or Blink Arrow. Anyway, so Mirror Arrow makes a minion, which is a clone of you, that appears there. Separately, there's a passive skill called Minion Instability. Minion Instability says that when your minions are on low life, like if you've got a zombie on low life, it explodes, doing damage based on its life. So far so good. If you cast a Mirror Arrow with Minion Instability, it'll explode when it's on low life. Next step. If you have low life, when it's copying you, it will have low life as well, because it has to copy you exactly, so it's distracting in PvP and it's hard to know which is which.
Right.
So if you get your life down to low levels by reserving your life, by taking mana reservation stuff and putting it on your life, you can create mirror arrows that explode as soon as you summon them, because they're all on low life as well. But when we were developing Mirror Arrow, it wasn't doing enough damage. Like, it was kind of crappy because it didn't have all your skills. The shots it fired were just weak. So we gave it a 5 times damage buff. Also, because they died way too quickly because it didn't have your armor and all that kind of stuff, we gave it a 5 times life buff. Because it has 5 times your life, it does 5 times explosion damage. And because it has 5 times its own damage, it does 25 times total damage. And so you now have a skill which creates remote explosions that are like nukes. And there's no way we could have predicted that. And that was in the game for weeks before anyone worked it out, if not months.
That is awesome. That is absolutely awesome. I didn't know about that. I think that's great.
It was around a year ago or something, maybe 2, but it was fun times to fix that. I mean, it wasn't hard to fix it. We just did the damage and life scaling in a different way, and it technically still works, just less good, 25 times less good.
There's a few people who had to re-roll after that.
Yeah.
In tying with skills, and there's the skill tree, then there are the skill gems, and then there are items. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel there's a huge connection between Path of Exile and Diablo 2 when it comes to items. Specifically, pre-expansion Diablo 2, in which rares seem to have a really good place in an item economy, and it was less about unique items. But there still are these unique items in Path of Exile that can definitely shape builds in one way or another. How much is it more to balance all of those things, the skill gems, the skill tree, and then you toss in a couple of unique items that completely throw things off too?
Yeah, that's an astute observation about the role of uniques and rares, and it's one we've been trying very hard to promote, where we want it that your character uses rares but has an occasional couple of uniques. Now, of course, you get situations where people are covered in uniques for certain builds, and that's unfortunate, and we try to dissuade it, but we are trying very hard to have it so you're dealing with random rares, because they're more fun to find, and you occasionally slot in a unique here and there to change how your build works.
Well, I think
it's really hard to hit this balance.
I think it's also, too, with the rares, the thing that I've always enjoyed is, both in Diablo and in Path of Exile, is an element of control. I feel like a unique has always been kind of static, but rares are essentially the Wild West. You never really know what you're going to get, and in Path of Exile you guys have included items to even augment them further, to make them even better, or to push them past what a unique could necessarily do, and that in and of itself is kind of the fun.
Yeah, we have a story about the rare versus unique balance that I enjoy a bit. We have this program in place in the past where top supporters of the game could pay some money and get to help us design a unique item that goes in the game. And as I'm sure you can imagine, everyone wants their item to be the best, and not everyone gets to actually be the best. So we had a case where a user wanted a direct damage axe. Like, as far as he was concerned, the goal is, I want it to be better than a rare. Just some damage, attack speed, lots of damage. And that's really tough. In fact, the correct answer should have been, no, we're not doing that. But instead we said, let's give it a shot. And so this is a problem, because either you pitch it way too rare, in which case no one sees it and it's upsetting, or you pitch it common enough that no one will try to craft weapons, because that's the weapon you use if you're hitting guys with an axe. So someone brought it to me, and I was doing unique approval at the time, because I was the guy who had the finger on the pulse of the item mods and said whether or not stuff could go out, which I don't do anymore because they're better at it than I am now. But so they brought this axe to me, and I said, look, without looking at it, I want you to nerf it, just hard, like 25%, bring it back to me. So they bring it back to me, and I say, look, this is going to sound insulting. It makes it sound like you don't know what you're doing, but nerf it again, then we'll talk this afternoon. So they bring it back to me this afternoon, and I go, okay, so how angry is the supporter? And they say, pretty angry. And I go, okay, let's have a look at this. And the stats are technically better than you can get on a rare still. And I said, well, we can't do that. It has to be, like, obviously that you can get rares better than this item. Nerf it, please. And they say, well, the supporter's going to be angry. And I go, look, trust me, we're not releasing this. It's better for us to go through the process. Please fix it. So the item got nerfed and came back to me with stats which were lower than you can get on a rare. Unfortunately, they were still like 90th percentile. Like you'd have to ID a ton of rares and get better than 90% lucky on each one of the mods.
Right.
And I said, look, try rolling some rares and tell me how many you have to roll before you get something better than this axe. And the answer was like 1,100 or something. So you need to nerf it further. So we pushed it down, and now it's getting to be just a really good rare. So with one more nerf for luck, we released it. And the community said, what the hell were they thinking? How could they release something this powerful? Even though it had like 7 nerfs to it. And that just shows really how difficult it is to like weigh the two together, where even just guaranteeing an average good rare is still an incredibly powerful thing, because as you said, there's a predictability to it. People know, I want that axe, and now they've got to, that slot is taken care of.
Right. And was the supporter pleased at the end with the uproar?
The supporter is a really nice guy who gets along with us really well and had no problem in the end, really. He was just disappointed that we were reducing his values, but he had no hard feelings. And years later, of course, the axe is seen as garbage because no one uses it anymore, and there's much better rares. That's how thin the tightrope is, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely understandable. Kind of shifting gears from items and stuff like that, because we got a timetable, and I've already used about 40 minutes of your time. Storytelling, kind of shifting from the gameplay, but to the story itself. I've dug into a lot of the Path of Exile lore, and there's a lot of depth there, but it's also kind of hidden. How do you come to telling this story that's broken up across all the acts and through all these different things? I mean, even items you find are giving you these tidbits of what happened.
Well, it's partly for several reasons. The first one is we don't have a cinematics department, so we can't tell awesome story with cinematics, which is something we'd love, but it's never possible to justify spending the money on it, when we could spend the money of one cinematic on making a whole expansion or something.
Right.
So we don't have the ability to tell a story like a movie, and we're afraid of doing it with in-game art because it's really not designed to be that up close. The second thing is that quite a lot of our players just want to kill some monsters and find some items, right? Like if you actually pigeonhole them and look at how they engage with the game, more than half just click through anything you show them. They just don't care. I knew this guy who bought the collector's edition for Diablo 2 back in the day, the one that came with the DVD with all the cinematics on it.
Right.
And he played thousands of hours per year for like 14 years. And I asked him recently, he's 25,000 hours into the game for Diablo 2. Did you ever watch the cinematics? He never watched them once, including the ones that just play automatically when you finish an act. Like he was skipping past those frustratingly, even though they were amazing quality and great storytelling. So some players don't care, and we would prefer to put story there for the players who do care to find and discover and explore, rather than force it on absolutely everyone, because that will upset the people who don't care.
Right.
And so that's why there's a bit of a show don't tell policy. Now, we've been criticized for having our story not apparent enough. Like some people wish they could see it more easily and don't want to go hunting because they like it but can't find it all. And that's something we're working on. We've tried with the new acts to have it be a bit more apparent, but we're still careful of crossing the line where it gets in people's faces too much.
Yeah, I know Diablo 3 in particular, the story, it was kind of pushed on you, and going through the campaign, like you couldn't avoid somebody yelling at you about terror or something like that. Whereas with Path of Exile, you kind of put it together, but in some ways it's kind of like a little bit of a mystery. Like if you really want to find it, you could do it. And in some ways, much like with a lot of Path of Exile, if you put in the time, it becomes pretty rewarding.
Yeah, it is also tricky to design it in from the beginning. Like I'm sure if we went and redid Path of Exile from scratch, things would probably be a bit better at storytelling with everything we've learned since then. But initially, when we started out, we said, what are our strengths? We're a ragtag team of kids. Like I was 24 when we started the project 11 years ago. And we said, what can we do? We said, well, we can code. We know how action RPGs work. We know, what makes a good item. We understand that games should be, online games with random level generation. All of this stuff.
Right.
Anyone good at storytelling? No one put their hands up. We can't tell stories. We're not writers. And so we didn't really emphasize it at the beginning. And so a lot of the story, as I was adding it in over the years, once we realized it was becoming important, and as we were designing Acts 2 and 3 and 4, we could flesh it out a lot better and have a cohesive narrative. Nowadays, there's a team of people with the job title of writer who are just writing future stuff. I mean, there's like books being written, multiple books in progress right now of various types to do with Path of Exile.
Awesome. If there's an opening in the department, I might know a guy. But
Nice.
um, so you talk about the future and about things that are happening. You guys, since the beginning, have been continually updating, and specifically with Fall of Oriath, the most recent expansion. Uh, how how is it to make that balance, to make that work, to consistently be on like that kind of timetable?
It's kind of bad. Like, it ruins your life to have to continually be on release schedule. Like, not having weekends for a decade and not going on holiday. I mean, this is something I inflict on myself. The team are fine. We let them have time off. It's okay. But honestly, it's really hard to deliver the content at the right schedule because, like, we released 3.0 straight into the deadline for submitting the last Xbox build, straight into a China launch, followed by the actual Xbox build, followed by fixing problems on all three realms. The release period is still going on for me, even though it came out weeks ago.
Right.
And then, like, we're getting into the important part of the development for our December expansion. That's coming up quite soon. There's 7.5 weeks left before our QA cutoff there. So it's getting to the point where there's quite a lot of hard decisions having to be made because we need to get that content underway for certain key things.
Right.
And it's a schedule that doesn't really ever give up because we want to release new stuff every 13 weeks. This is great for the players, but as a company, we're looking for better ways to manage it internally. And currently, I just try very hard to put as much of it as I can on myself so I can tell other team members, look, you've been working really hard, take some time off, you deserve it.
Huh.
A bit disruptive for me, but I'm in it for the long haul, so it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound taxing though. I mean, plus, now I feel even more guilty of taking your time.
Oh no, that's okay. I enjoy having conversations like this.
No, I mean, like, and I definitely appreciate it. But yeah, it is really intense, and you guys have been at this for years. I joked because we did a print interview a year ago, maybe a little bit before, or maybe just a little bit more than that. I joked like, oh, do you ever see a Path of Exile 2.0? And I would argue that you guys just did that. You essentially doubled the game. And now you're still talking about doing more. I mean, you guys just put out a post about what lies ahead. Do you ever just wonder, like, especially after a huge patch like this, like, maybe we just take 13 weeks off?
The problem is the internet is fickle, and the second you stop providing entertainment, they go to something else. I had a great conversation with a popular streamer, like super popular, like everyone in the world has heard of them to some extent, and he explained to me that consistency was important. He wants to stream every day at a reliable time because the second you deviate from the schedule, you lose like a quarter of your viewers. I mean, I forget the exact number.
Right.
But that consistency is why we've been releasing a news post every single day on New Zealand weekdays for many, many years now, and why we try very hard to stick to our 13-week schedule. Because if we do, then the results are predictable. We know how many users we're going to have. It follows the right graph curve. It's all completely under our control because we're sticking to a schedule that people can expect and understand, and it can just grow. If we take time off, we'll just shed half our users, and that might be better for our sanity, especially for senior leadership, because other people are taking turns taking time off.
Right.
But we're very afraid of losing what we have. We've worked very hard to reach this, so that's the reason why we're pushing on it very quickly to make new content. Thankfully, there's years of ideas left.
And I'm assuming, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure you won't give us all the details, but the next expansion's not going to be 5 more acts, so.
No. The next expansion is a regular expansion size. Like, look at things like Sacrifice of the Vow and Forsaken Masters and that kind of stuff. What a normal expansion that we develop is like. And this one has a 17-week schedule. That's okay. Because it got disrupted a bit by the Fall of Oriath being released at a wonky time in our schedule. We're getting back on the schedule we want to be, which is releasing something in December. And so this is a 17-week development period. Harbinger will take up the first, Harbinger running will take up the first 13 of that, then we'll work something out for a month, which we haven't decided yet, and then release the new expansion very early in December, which will, of course, have a new league alongside it.
Right. And in looking, so Fall of Oriath and Diablo 3 both released pretty close. I mean, in terms of Diablo 3 just put out the Necromancer pack, 6 weeks, I think, before Oriath. And they monetized it. It was $15. You got yourself the Necromancer, a couple of pets, and a stash tab. In looking at that, compared to Oriath, you guys put out, a huge amount of content. Was there ever any question, and I know Path of Exile's been free to play since its inception, of monetizing at all in for the content, or was it just like, what, we pumped out 5 acts of content, and we're just giving it out there?
So I feel the sad or successful thing, depending on how you want to describe it, is the fact that you're asking if we considered monetizing it, when we did actually sell supporter packs which granted access to the beta, which is implicit monetization
Right.
of the fact if you want to see it early, you can pay $30 to do so. And people still view that as supporting the company, which is great, even though it is to some extent monetizing it in a paid game model. And that was successful, but in a way, it's also, it's something I'd rather that we could provide it for free to everyone. It's just that charging for beta access in this roundabout way is a great way of getting the funds to complete the development of that content.
Well, piggybacking off of that, though, too, if you did purchase the supporter pack, you got all the same stuff that you would in any other supporter pack, but then you also got beta access, just kind of a nice little bonus.
That is true.
So it wasn't like you were paying for beta access, you're paying to support the continual development of the game, but as a nice little bonus, you're going to get all this stuff, plus, come on, join us in the beta.
Yep, and I'd like to think that everyone was going to buy a pack anyway, but I'm sure there are people out there who viewed this as $30 to play the beta, and thankfully they all seem to have a good time, and we didn't receive anyone angry about this. So,
you guys,
I would now receive some emails, I guess.
you guys were also sending out keys through various other means, and you could win them throughout different things. So it's not like it was the only way to get in.
Yeah. To answer your question about whether we'd consider actually selling an expansion outright, it would probably be the wrong thing for both business and image reasons, right? Like, we've established our company as a game making a free-to-play game where, aside from a little bit of hoarding space for long-term storage, you get exactly the same gameplay benefits if you don't pay any money versus if you spend a lot of money. And so we'd lose that image if we started charging for releases. In addition, from just a pure money point of view, the reason why everyone is doing free-to-play is because you actually make more money due to price discrimination.
Right.
If someone can't afford to play your game, you weren't going to get any money anyway, so you may as well have them be content by playing it and appearing on the ladder and in town. And if someone does like your game, they can spend a lot of money if they want to. Many people are just spending $30 or $60 or $100 in a year, but there are people out there who have some means behind them and treat this as their primary thing they do, and they can spend thousands.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, and I had shared with you, I bought a supporter pack. I found myself just really engaged, and wanting a little more stash space, and it was an easy justification. It was the exact same amount as what I would pay for any other game I wanted to play at the time. So I just felt the need to do it. And
I appreciate that. We'll put it to good use.
Well, I think you guys already have. But it was not. It wasn't a difficult decision. Or I think originally coming into a free to play game, I was like, oh yeah, I can just play and I won't feel the urge, and I was engrossed enough to make the purchase. And in part, it's due to a lot of the cool things you're doing, which kind of ties into kind of one of the last points here. The different modes that you happen to have. We talked about hardcore and solo self-found and standard, but then there's this whole other beast of what's happening constantly, which would be leagues and races. In Diablo 3, we right now have seasons, so it's really just Diablo 2 ladders that reset every 3 months with a couple updates to different sets and maybe a couple of new items added in. But leagues and races are this whole other beast.
So this came from when playing Diablo 2, they had segregated their economies off into implicitly hardcore versus not hardcore, and then expansion versus not expansion, and then ladder versus not ladder, as they incrementally added each of those into lower 8 eventually. Also segmented across the various different realms. So in total there were 6 realms, so that's a total of, in the 40s of separate, different, distinct economies. And so we wanted to both combine our international realms together into one big realm where possible. People in Asia can play with people in Europe and so on. But also we liked the division where hardcore people couldn't trade items to standard people. because obviously they took a lot more effort to get those items. And so we had this concept of generalizing it to leagues, which we would use for, essentially the ladder reset thing, like you're saying. But we also realized when people play a Diablo 2 ladder reset or a beginning of an economy in any other action RPG, they love to rush through the game and compete on the ladder to see who can get to the highest level. It's the ladder rush kind of thing,
right,
which is still popular to this day. And so we thought, well, if the first 24 hours of a league is the most interesting, then why not run these 24-hour races or 1-hour races or that kind of thing? So we tried different durations and found that, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, they're really good at testing to see who can go through the game the fastest and what tricks they have. And this is where years later, the league system and the races came from. Though, of course, it's worth noting that with leagues, to keep them interesting, we've basically bundled each one with a mini expansion of there's lots of interesting stuff happening in this league that's new and potentially time exclusive.
And what's really cool is, a lot of the stuff that you introduce to the leagues then can become a core part of the game if it works.
Yeah. It lets us try things without having the obligation to keep them in. We were speaking with another online game developer recently at GDC, where they lamented the fact that if they were to try adding something fun that might not be fun, it has to stay around. The players don't have a way of letting them take it out. That just is unprecedented. They can't take it out of their game. Whereas with leagues, we can go, well, that's shit, just do another one.
Yeah, right now we see the Harbingers, and previous it was Legacy, which you had just kind of a cool little option to kind of customize what was happening. And we saw that Legacy didn't make its way in. Is there talk or what goes into deciding whether or not it makes it into the game?
There's value in keeping things out because they're special later on. Legacy was interesting because it put in everything we've taken out. For example, Talisman. We never put back into the core game.
Right.
But Talisman was available in Legacy. And Legacy was cool because it had the things that hadn't been put back in. So by choosing not to roll Legacy in, we've got Legacy in our back pocket if we need it in the future. Plus there were some legitimate concerns, both with it being too good and too finicky to manage. People had problems with managing all the league stones, which is okay for a few months, but not great for the permanent future of the game.
Right.
In addition, the items you get from it and the expectations that it leaves you with certainly take a while to wear off. You like the item fountains. So that's in our back pocket, where if there's a week or a month where we really need an event and we don't have anything else or the capability to develop it, we can say, you know what, people like Legacy, have that again for a month with a few extra tweaks.
Nice.
And so it's useful to have things. In addition, there are places you can slot them in the game that are more hidden than others. The Zana mod system, where when you're doing maps, you can add an old league property to a map.
Right.
If you stick one of these right up at level 8, it's essentially not in the game for most players, but the top 1% have access to that in an expensive way.
And that's an interesting way to kind of go about integrating it back. I've taken an hour of your time, Chris, and honestly, I could probably talk to you for several more. But you are out there making games, and we sincerely appreciate your time tonight, or in your case, this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed being on the podcast.